All right. I'm so excited to be here with you all. My name's Amy May. I am from the nonprofit organization US Digital Response, and I am really pleased to be here to moderate today's discussion. Just to give a little bit of context about what we're all here for today, the Digital Service Network is an organization that empowers governments to use human-centered strategies to deliver digital services that meet the needs and expectations of people who use them, something that I think is probably very important to all of us on this call. The Digital Service Network is supported by the Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University, as well as US Digital Response. So we'll be sharing stories and experiences about government digital services, which is a cornerstone of the Digital Service Network. And today is one example in this series of us sharing those services. So our focus in today's session is to learn about how the digital service and procurement teams in the city of Boston are working together to improve government services. You'll hear a little bit about how Julia and Laura have cultivated strong, productive working relationships, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for any questions that you might have. Once again, this is part of the summer event series that's focused around the important relationships that make government digital transformation possible. As we know, so much of government is about relationships. So we'll first hear from Julia and Laura with some of their own background and information about their work and organization. From there, we'll have some structured question and answer time with our guests, and we'll have some time at the end for open Q&A from the audience as well. As a reminder, this webinar is free, and a recording and a recap of the session will be available online after today's event. If you are not a member yet, we do hope you'll take a minute to sign up for the Digital Service Network email list. The DSN is here to be responsive to your needs, and they will develop more webinars, articles, research toolkits, and anything else based on what you're looking for to advance the work in your organization. So just like the work that we're talking about today, DSN is very user-centered, and this group are some of the key users. If you have questions while Julia and Laura are talking through their presentation today, feel free to put those questions in chat, and I will moderate the questions as they come through. We'll probably collect them all to respond to at the end to make sure that we're keeping on time. We'll continue to be active throughout the chat, so folks from DSN will post links and other relevant references as we go through, so keep an eye out in the chat if you're curious about additional resources. And with that, I will turn over to Julia and Laura.
Thanks so much. We're really excited to be here. I'm Laura Melle, and I'm the director. Oh, sorry, I am unmuted. Okay, great. Just checking my settings. I'm the Director of Procurement Services for the City of Boston. I'm really excited to be able to present a little bit of a case study of what Boston is doing around services procurement. I'm sure that in your jurisdictions, procurement works perfectly. It's everybody's favorite endeavor. So you probably don't need any ideas on how to make improvements, but I thought I would share what we're doing. And it definitely speaks to today's theme of key relationships. So we can dive right into the next slide. As context, the City of Boston has historically had centralized procurement for goods and commodities. So if departments need anything from office supplies to a fire truck, they just put in the request and it's handled by the expert buyers and contract administrators in the central procurement department. However, when it comes to services, including technology, that is completely decentralized and it's managed by individual departments. And across our 60 departments, there's really a wide variety of capacity and sort of expertise in trying to navigate this complex process. So over the past year, the city's procurement department has grown. We're now trying to be more of a one-stop shop to support not only goods procurements, but also to help folks who need contracts for services, which again, it could include consulting, software as a service, design work, also, of course, design and construction, landscaping, snow removal, you name it. And then we also have a third team supporting grant making, so giving out grants to community organizations, basically any way that departments want to invest their money aside from their headcount. So I think a few key things that I want to highlight. Obviously, this is addressing some operational and business pain points, but the reason that we actually got this incredible increase in headcount, we created 13 new positions and regraded several existing positions in the goods team for equity and to really elevate and prioritize the work that's being done. So the way that we got this incredible investment is because city leadership recognized that procurement can be and should be a strategic way to achieve our policy goals. And so there's certainly an expectation of results. I think one of the areas we're talking about most publicly right now is, just minor policy goals like closing the racial wealth gap in the city. One tool we can use is awarding more contracts to small local women and minority-owned businesses. Mayor Wu also talks about the Green New Deal. Procurement can do a lot there, not only in terms of green procurement and what specifications we use for the things we're buying, but how do we accelerate our design and construction procurement process to build a seawall around the city, or whatever it is that we determine we need to do to be resilient in the face of climate change. So this has been really exciting. I've been working in procurement first in DO-IT in the Department of Innovation and Technology, actually starting as a summer fellow with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. Then I moved over to the Boston Planning and Development Agency at the time, their real estate department. Felt like I needed to do some snow removal, construction, flood mitigation. So the opportunity to create this central team is incredibly exciting. So if you jump to the next slide, this shows what I just spoke about, but in the form of an org chart. Our department head, Casey, she reports up to the chief financial officer of the city of Boston, who is a cabinet level official. So that's kind of where we live, in the finance cabinet, which I think is a particularly great testament to the partnership that we have with Julia, who's all the way over in another cabinet, different cabinet chief. So you can see that the goods team continues to be the largest, and they handle several other functions as well, such as advertising, vendor support, training. We have a 2-person grant making team, small but mighty, and they're supporting just an incredible number of programs. I think everyone has probably seen this explosion during COVID, just realizing the ways in which we need to and can support community organizations. But my team's right here in the middle, the procurement services team. So we have 5 procurement analysts, 2 senior analysts, and then 3 additional analysts. And then we also have 2 data analysts, which is pretty incredible capacity to have embedded within procurement. But obviously, even with 5 procurement analysts, we cannot write every services procurement. We can't write every RFP or manage every services contract for the entire city. So rather than formally centralizing everything as we have with goods, we're actually keeping the responsibility for the procurement with the department, but we're here to provide centralized support. The departments are the experts in what they need, and they're the ones who have to work with the vendors day after day. So I think it's great for them to maintain ownership and control of this process. However, they are experts in the work they do, but they are not necessarily experts in procurement, and that's where our centralized support comes in. So we're trying to sort of get the best of both worlds in terms of centralization, decentralization, grass is always greener, et cetera. But if you jump to my last slide, it shows what I mean when I talk about centralized support. We're pushing out a lot of materials. The city of Boston is sophisticated in a lot of ways, but we still lack formal documentation in a lot of areas. Things are transmitted by word of mouth, oral history, shadowing. So we're trying to create templates, how-to guides, checklists, which are certainly helpful in and of themselves, but the opportunity to create a template is also a chance to step back and to talk to folks like the law department, like DO-IT, to say, let's make sure we have all the good stuff in here that's going to set us up for success. And let's take out all the archaic language that's just been kind of clogging up our documents and may have even been creating barriers to working with us without actually adding any value. And this is a great chance to do things like put in standards for the types of digital tools that we use or for our branding. And so to push these materials out, we are trying to strengthen the city's muscles around training and professional development. Whether that's a traditional Zoom or classroom training, partnering up with the state on their procurement certifications, or whether it's something more creative like a cohort or workshop for departments that are working on similar RFPs. I have the dream of branding something as an RFP Palooza, or one-on-one office hours, or creating pre-recorded videos, really trying to meet people where they are and adhere to their learning style. And the true heart of the procurement analyst role is this third bucket of support services. The idea is that they really get to know their departments, and they have a tailored approach that's different with each department. DoIT is huge. It has many different teams. They're pretty savvy. Other departments are much smaller and they have one person who's trying to do everything finance, everything HR, everything office management, what have you. And so once they figure out the right people, the right ways to engage, then they say, hey, I'm committed to your goals. I understand your budget. I've read through whatever type of plans or priorities you've put together for the year. How do we map out, break that down into what you'll have to procure and sort of map out a timeline, and identify the priority procurements where we'll be really hands-on, or just some pain points that span multiple projects that we can help tackle behind the scenes while the departments are focused on the day-to-day. And really just trying to help departments shift from help them use procurement as a proactive tool rather than something that's reactive and that's seen as a barrier. And obviously, if we're asking people to plan proactively, we need to give them the data in order to do so. We have a lot of great financial data in Boston, but it's really locked up in our enterprise financial system. And so if you're not able to run a SQL query, or if you need something more visual and not just an Excel that's going to spit out, it can be really hard to actually use that data to inform your decisions. And of course, there's a lot of other data that's locked up in paper, PDFs, someone's cabinet, what have you. And so that's why we're so lucky to have two data analysts who are focused on public reporting, for example, our spend data with women and minority-owned businesses, as well as creating internal dashboards, tools, and visualizations. Because if we're saying that our team's goal is to improve procurement, we need to have some sort of definition of improvement and some sort of metrics. And so I think what you can see here is that we're really using a carrot rather than a stick approach. Our team did not insert ourselves into any formal workflows. We didn't create extra forms that have to come to us for approval. Instead, we're saying, come work with us and we will, we can help you. We can make your lives easier. We can help you get the best partners. We can help you articulate your needs. We can help you manage your relationships in order to be successful. And so that's a key thing, a key piece, I think, of relationship building. And the other thing is, you see this little line down at the bottom. In order to do any of this work, our analysts need to bust silos. They need to have really close relationships with everybody who supports the procurement process. So, the budget office that's allocating the money that we're spending, the law department, the auditing department, which checks everything for compliance and actually issues the payments. And of course, last but not least, I built the momentum, but the supplier diversity team is also a really key partner in terms of policy and outreach. And last but not least, the Department of Innovation and Technology, a key partner, in terms of the tools that we use and that folks are using to go through the procurement process, using that data that I mentioned, and also just improving the way that we procure technology. So the last thing I'll say is, I feel really excited to be here. I would definitely urge all of you to develop relationships with your procurement people. No matter how much capacity you have, as government employees, we're not delivering all these services from scratch. Like, we're not keeping the city running all by ourselves. We're always procuring goods and services. And, if you find that person in your organization who can guide you through that and make it a little bit easier, all your projects will be, that 5%, 10% more successful. So I'm really excited to be here in conversation today, and I will turn it over to Julia. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And yes, 100%, I am super big advocate and testament of how incredible, working relationships between departments that are delivering goods and services are to the procurement department. Just by way of introduction, I am Julia Gutiérrez. I'm the Chief Digital Officer here at the City of Boston. So nice to see so many friendly names in the meeting today, and also a lot of new folks. the Boston Digital Service team sits within the Department of Innovation and Technology, which, to Laura's point, is a separate cabinet than the finance cabinet. The Department of Innovation and Technology enables its workforce to deliver a better government for every constituent. What Laura failed to mention in her conversation was just the volume that both the procurement department and the Department of Innovation and Technology support in terms of city staff. We at the City of Boston are a city of, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at this point we're like in 20,000 city employees that, together provide, we counted this a couple of years ago, over 550 different types of city services, programs, and initiatives. And so the scope here is big. Like I said, Boston Digital Service sits within the Department of Innovation and Technology. And there we go. And $1 billion in annual discretionary spend across 60 departments. We sit within Do It, and essentially we're a products, services, and now policy and governance program that really partners with departments to either create or improve their programs, services, products, and initiatives that make the City of Boston a great place to live and a home for all of our residents. And so before I dive into our governance and policy program, which I think is one of the most relevant growth areas in terms of our relationship with procurement, I just want to do a quick shout out that, over the last 2 years, Do It has been really on a transformational journey to support all of these different departments. And we are hiring in a bunch of different places. We are overhauling our permitting and licensing system. And so we're hiring a senior director of permits and licenses. As part of Do It, we are also hiring a procurement analyst, which will work very closely with Laura and her team, as well as some data engineer positions. Within Boston Digital Service, over the last 2 years, we've really grown our 311 and basic city services team, which is geared towards really transforming how the City of Boston provides basic city services to all of its residents. But we have also created a new program, user experience and service design program within Boston Digital Service, and we're hiring a UX content strategist right now. So if you're interested in that, feel free to apply. And last but not least, one of the new programs that we have built is our technology governance and policy program. And so this program seeks to empower the whole workforce citywide with technology to improve constituent experiences, foster that cross-department collaboration that Laura was mentioning, and promote innovation. Their goal is also to create the organizational infrastructure for informed, thoughtful, open, and timely decisions about technology and how we govern that, and develop and maintain institutional supports and guardrails for technology procurement and use that prevent harm, advance equity, and achieve, Mayor's vision for the city that is a home for everybody. And so as part of our governance and policy program, we have a director, and we also have 5 business relationship managers. We're actually hiring for our last one right now. And so if you're interested, come join us. And really the notion here is that the business relationship managers are there to support, very similar to the procurement analysts within Laura's team, to support the departments to understand holistically their goals, operational needs, and how technology plays into that, whether that is constituent-facing technology or internal-facing technology for their operations, and then support the Department of Innovation and Technology to make sure that we're making thoughtful and strategic decisions about areas where enterprise solutions, there's more than one department that might need a thing, and enterprise solutions might be the answer, or where there's specificity in sort of some of the needs where different procurements need to happen. This is all, at the baseline, like a key core component to transforming digital service delivery, in 21st century that we are here today. Most of our programs and services have a digital component to them. And as I mentioned, we've got 550 probably more, that's not a comprehensive list of city services that we provide through the city of Boston. My next slide, if you want to go to the next slide, is just a quick org chart to also sort of explain where Boston Digital Service sits within the Department of Innovation and Technology. And so in addition to Boston Digital Service, we've got different verticals for technology, infrastructure, network. We've got enterprise applications like our HR and financial systems. We've got emerging technologies, innovation hub. We have our operations team, which is finance, procurement, HR. A cybersecurity department that includes our identity and access management system. And we're looking to make investments in that for businesses and constituent-facing identity and access management over the next couple of years, as well as our chief data officer and our chief digital equity officer, who also leads our broadband and cable office. Within Boston Digital Service, this is my latest iteration of how to organize the work. On the one side, there's like products and services that we built and maintain in support of departments. And so here we've got, in terms of staff, 16 plus people. Like I said, we're hiring, and it's a cross-functional team. There's content, data, design, engineering, product, process improvement, strategy. We oversee digital communications, like our Boston.gov website. We oversee our 301 and basic city services, as well as a combination of like a technology ecosystem for the different digital applications that departments use to provide services. And then on the policy and governance sides is the new program that I'm talking about, where we've got our director and our business relationship managers. And so in one way, in terms of like the relationship that I, as the chief digital officer, have with procurement, sort of there's two hats here, right? There's a hat where like, when I'm talking about the products and services that we deliver, to some extent, I am a customer of the procurement department. They are currently supporting us in a couple of active procurements. And then on the other hand, in terms of policy and governance, we work together with them to ensure that, to Laura's point, as there's templates and guidelines and supports being created for different departments, we're able to bake in some of the standards around experiential requirements and security requirements and data requirements in that process. I think that is my last slide. And so happy to hand it back over to you, Amy.
Amazing. Thank you both for talking through your respective teams. That was really interesting. I have a lot of interest in procurement, which is totally not a nerdy thing to say at all. Okay, we're going to move into a bit of a structured question and answer, and then after that, we'll go to questions from the audience. So the first thing that I wondered about as you all talk through was, because procurement and policy has such like a long tail, and in order to see, the end effect of a given process or a given procurement, I'm curious if you two could talk a little bit more about how the digital service team and the procurement team kind of balance the different timelines and how you work together to create that better digital service together.
Do you want to kick us off?
I think I use the language a lot that like my team is building the plane while we're flying it, right? You try to just do incrementally better on each new procurement that you do, each new contract that you execute, while also in the background trying to preserve capacity to think about how could I make some bigger picture process improvements that would make it easier overall to be more agile and iterative in our work with vendors, or, whatever it might be. My first, I feel like this actually, I just think about my own journey as an example of this. So I was a summer fellow brought in through the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. I was assigned a project to work on one specific RFP for the entire summer, which is like really cute now to be like, oh my gosh, I spent 3 months on one RFP. But that RFP was with the Department of Innovation and Technology. and Yasha Franklin Hodge was coming from the private sector to be CIO under Mayor Walsh in a previous administration. So he's coming from the private sector, and he's like, people keep telling me that hiring and acquiring are going to be the pain points. And so he created a procurement position and also a talent acquisition position within Do It. Those have now grown to be like more of a complete team. But I think you can see that like my time in the city started with like, let's throw a fellow at this. Then it was, let's have one person who is just going to learn a lot on the job, but has this mandate of like tech procurement. We want to work with different people. How can we do that? And now I'm leading a team that is like actually structurally empowered to think about doing things differently. That journey did take 9 years. But yeah, I think it's, you know, you try to do the incremental and the long term at the same time, but I'll toss it back to Lilia.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to double down on that. The other way that I think about it is being like opportunistic around the things that, you know, if we're talking about procurement, essentially like contracts are about to expire, right? And so whereas we've got, you know, proactively took a look and we're like, okay, there's 550 city services. Let's in this landscape inventory identify which ones are paper-based and which ones are digital. And then the ones that are digital, which ones are using which technology stack, so on and so forth. So there's like, we have a good understanding, but to Laura's point, you know, there is, you know, the policy and governance program is new, like we're in the process of hiring. So it's not like we've got staff and capacity to all of a sudden say like, hey, let's transform all of these 550 at the same time. And so one of the strategies that we've used is, all right, let's take stock of, with a little bit of this upfront planning, right? Like, let's understand which ones are the services that rely on major systems. And let's identify areas where at the next contract opportunity, we can work with our vendor partners to, you know, add and improve some of these like constituent experience, you know, standards into the procurement. Or for the ones that are currently paper-based, we are in an active actually procurement with Service Design Collective, who is supporting us in taking stock of like about 250 city services that we're providing through a combination of different technology stacks that we stood up as part of our COVID response. You know, we needed to make sure that continuity of government was key. And so therefore we, you know, turned on digital services like from day to night. And so now we're taking stock of that and coming up with a thoughtful strategy of like, where does it make sense for us to, depending on the use case of the digital service and what it is that we're trying to achieve with that, align better what technologies that we're using in order to deliver those exceptional city services.
The one other thing I would add is that folks often perceive that procurement law is holding them back or some other sort of standard, you know, or policy or process. But I think, again, it's key to empower your staff to really, really learn the details and to like read the laws, like so that it's not just urban legend, to actually understand where do we have flexibility versus what is actually required. Because like, you know, we all sit around thinking about how we would rewrite procurement law if we could, but a lot of the transformations that we're making in Boston are just being thoughtful about how to use the existing tools that we have and our existing options to do things differently. You know, people are like, oh, you can't do agile contracting in government. Well, guess what? We have on-call plumbing contracts where you're defining each specific task as you go and like, you know, estimating level of effort based on your plumbing emergency. But hey, that sounds a lot like a sprint to me. You know, so I think just having somebody who can think that through and advise you is a way that you might be able to make change more quickly than you think, despite that long tail of policy change.
That's amazing. I have never heard that correlation between plumbing contracts and agile sprints, but I love that so much. And I think that just points at like the ingenuity that you both have and the strategy that you both have in thinking through some of these challenges. Um, so you talked a little bit about kind of the overall strategic way that you kind of pick off the most important challenges and like the biggest opportunities one at a time. And I wondered if you two could talk a little bit about how you find um, kind of commonalities between the competing goals and priorities in your teams.
It's a complex barter system, you know. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. That's not a real answer. Yeah, Julie, I'd love to hear your take on that initially.
Oh, okay, perfect. I thought you were gonna go for it. Honestly, and I don't know if this sounds like a cliche answer, but this is truly how I see things. Like, I truly believe that like our bottom goal is exactly the same, right? Like, we are all in service of our residents. We are all working to make government better for Bostonians and, you know, our Boston visitors, and really make City of Boston a city for everybody. And so I think with that as the baseline, then layering on top different, you know, what, like, I'm just trying to even, Laura, think through like, what would be the areas where we have competing priorities? Like, I don't know, time to market, or I don't know, help me out, which would be the areas where we would be like not in sync.
Yeah, I think one interesting example to me is our financial system, which we have an enterprise financial system. We use PeopleSoft. We use it not only for like accounting, but we also use it for procurement, and it is our public-facing supplier portal that vendors interact with, and it's how they submit their proposals. You know, and I think for a long time there, well, whatever. I think for a long time there was a perception that if government staff was using software, it's okay for it to just be hideous and like incredibly hard to use. And so, but to put this in maybe a different way, I do think that for a long time, you know, DoIT had limited capacity to think about like user experience, and that was focused on residents. But I think now that it's kind of like all hands on deck, like we actually have the UX capacity to look at the supplier portal and the vendor experience. We actually have the analytics team helping us pull data out of the financial system so that we can use it more easily to build dashboards. And so I think, you know, as the digital team is able to like look internally a little bit too and apply some of these standards to ourselves, that's been so wonderful to see. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what some other examples are. I think a lot of it is like sharing more information. You know, sometimes the left hand just doesn't know what the right is doing. And so just touching base a little bit more often on staffing plans, like on hiring plans, restructuring plans, you know, really looking at our budgets as a blueprint for like what are the priorities and what might be missing. Yeah, and I think, you know, I think it's always tough. Again, I think some of it is like we're just going for it. Like we're building out the business relationship manager role, and we're building out the procurement analyst role, and we're building out some new roles in supplier diversity. And we were very thoughtful about role definition and responsibilities, but also we're just jumping in because we know there's enough work, and then we're kind of just touching base as we go and tweaking as needed.
Yeah.
But I am really happy that they're helping us with the supplier portal. For a while, I was really sad that like the CIO never logged into the financial system, even though like so much of his staff was supporting it, and I was sad about that. But now I'm so happy.
To that end, actually, just a little plug. If you know anybody that does business with the City of Boston or has done business with the City of Boston in the past, we are in an active research engagement for this, and we are looking for participants to speak to. So if you go to boston.gov/procurement, you can have a link to sign up to potentially be part of our research panel. Yeah, just one quick note, Amy, and I know that it looks like we take long to answer your questions. But on the visibility side of the house, so there is, you know, one of the things that right now we haven't brought up in the conversation so much is that DoIT is not the only department across the City of Boston that purchases technology. Different departments do as well. And so this is like with the you know, policy and governance hat on, there is this like additional visibility and communication that we've been doing now that we are staffed to be able to do so, where we're having a better understanding across the different departments, where there are areas where they would they have a business need that is not currently being met, and they're looking to purchase something. And so instead of them having no support and having, sort of like to go out on their own and try to procure some technology, now they've got like two systems of support here, one on the procurement side of the house with Laura's team, and then one on the business relationship side of the house within Do It, where we're supporting them and assessing what their needs are and seeing if there's actually existing technology that we already have as a city that can meet those needs, as opposed to having to go procure out the same thing and having that take longer for them to meet their operations needs.
That's awesome. And I think these are all perfectly very thoughtful and thorough responses. I think I'm fascinated and riveted by this conversation. One thing that really stands out to me about both of your responses is just how much kind of strategic storytelling there is as well. I feel like you both are so good at identifying the opportunities. I like putting a beginning, middle, and end to that, being able to couch it in a narrative, which is so important to get buy-in for literally anything. Laura, I think you had mentioned earlier that city leadership really realized how important procurement could be as a lever to achieve policy goals. And I wonder if you do have any advice for folks who maybe their own leadership has not quite had that realization. How can you use storytelling to highlight the importance of procurement, or in general, as you do your work, how do you pull out those storytelling elements as you go along to show this does have value and this is important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can see that we both are in the business of culture change and of being perceived as a friendly, helpful partner. A department came to me the other day and they had kind of messed up, whatever. They had run out of money on their transportation contract, but instead of just and they were trying to figure out what to do, and what they wanted to do was not the best option. But instead of being like, no, you can't do that, I was like, oh, tell me more about what this is for. Oh my gosh, this is the Age Strong department. They need to get seniors, older Bostonians, to the senior prom. Oh my gosh, we are going to make that happen. I am committed to this. Your work is really important. Let's talk about the best way to do it. And so, I think people say do it, more like do it yourself. Procurement, there's no funny slogan because it's just a bad word in and of itself. So just trying to change that, right? And trying to show that we are committed to a successful outcome, but that true success, comes through fair competition, getting the best services at the best value, making sure your tools are accessible, blah, blah, blah. All that to be said. So leveraging storytelling. Yeah, I will admit I absolutely used equitable procurement as a bit of a Trojan horse. It really caught folks' attention. There was very much a public narrative. There was a lot of pressure. And so it allowed us to tell the story of how procurement can contribute to these policy goals. But I think it's important to remember that this is nothing new. Folks that are driving trucks as part of their contracts with the city of Boston, they have to put side guards on them, which has been proven to protect pedestrians and cyclists. Very sadly, in our neighboring jurisdiction of Cambridge, 2 cyclists were killed recently in crashes with trucks where they were sucked under because there weren't any side guards. We have had things like that for a million years. Our vendors have to pay a living wage. They can't discriminate against people with criminal backgrounds. They have to provide OSHA safety training if it's a construction project. We have always tried to seize our purchasing power to do the double bottom line. But supplier diversity really caught on. I think because it's an area where we know we need to use all the tools that we possibly have. But I always try to make it more about how can procurement be responsive to policy goals. So one quick story that I'll tell is about, and I'm taking credit for the work of many others, standing on the shoulders of many. Boston was actually able to pass legislation at the state level to create a new procurement method for us. As many jurisdictions do, we have, for smaller dollar purchases, rather than advertising them publicly, you just have to request 3 quotes. You can choose who to reach out to. It's a less formal process. In our case, you don't even have to sign a formal contract at the end. Therefore, it doesn't have to go through legal review. So what we said was, hey, that nice and easy 3-quote process that you can do only up to $50,000 will let you go all the way up to $250,000 as long as the 3 vendors that you reach out to are certified with the city or the state. So small, local, women, minority owned, veteran owned, LGBT owned, disabled owned, et cetera. Like really a really inclusive thing. And I just love that, because usually when we try to achieve policy goals through procurement, we make you get more certifications and fill out more forms and get approvals from more people. But we actually made this easier for both staff and vendors. It's encouraging people to get certified. You know, they're happy that they don't have as much paperwork to do. The vendors are happy. We've had 30 IQCs to date in basically just the past year, totaling almost $4 million, including a couple with Do It. And so I think, to your point about storytelling, like finding ways to make people feel like you're really there to help them and there to make their life easier, and then finding some sort of quick wins where you actually can do that. Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that question was just geared towards Laura. I would say, like, plus one to everything that Laura said. And I think it's actually something that, you know, to the group here is a familiar piece, right? Like sometimes technology doesn't sound sexy to, you know, our stakeholders. Sometimes, most of the time, procurement doesn't sound, you know, the same. And so I think being able to tell the stories about the outcomes that we're achieving with technology, with procurement, is really what allows us to be able to be in those rooms and like use these processes and systems to support everybody's end goal. And, you know, and so I think this is like user-centered design 101, you know, to some extent, right? Which is like, let's focus on like talking about the real impact that we're having through these processes that might seem bureaucratic and complex, you know, not.
Cool. We will get to audiences in a second, but I do want to ask one more, which is, do you have advice for other teams looking to build strong relationships between their digital teams or digital service teams and procurement functions?
Come chat with us earlier than you think. Like, let's bounce ideas off of each other. It'll make things easier down the road, and it will make us really invested in your project and really excited to support it. You know, honestly, from like the day you start thinking about the budget, like, you know, let's chat. I think that would be one of the biggest things.
Yeah. And I think on the flip side of that, from the digital service side of the house, I would say, like, be curious about understanding the underlying procurement processes that exist. And so instead of just going into the procurement team and saying like, hey, I need this, say like, hey, like, you know, one of the things that I think, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but like makes me a good partner with you is like, for a while in my previous job at the state, like I was the business operations manager for the digital team for 10 months while somebody was out on leave. And so I had to really learn all of the procurement policies, our like statewide technology policies, how we did procurement and operating and different contract vehicles. And so being curious to like understanding how, you know, under the hood works from procurement perspective, I think is helpful. And then I think to double down on Laura's recommendation, I would say, instead of just saying, you know, thinking through in a silo what it is that you need, like coming to the procurement office and saying like, hey, this is the outcome I'm trying to achieve. How can you help me understand from like a contracting vehicle perspective, a, you know, vendor pool perspective, all of these different systems that exist for us to meet that goal.
Thank you both. We are now going to turn to audience questions. So I'm going to go through them in the order that we receive them. We'll get through as many as we can. The first one was from Clay. Clay, let me know if I'm recapturing this correctly, but I believe you asked, are you using cooperative intergovernmental procurement on services and or for goods and services?
So we leverage some contracts that have been set up like for us to take advantage of. There's a lot of statewide contracts in Massachusetts. We also use GSA Schedule 70. In terms of procurements that we put out saying like, hey, Boston and Cambridge are looking for a partner. I've only seen us do that for like our bike share system. Um, I think in the past, particularly in IT, sometimes we used statewide contracts as like a shortcut, and not necessarily because they were actually the route to the getting the best partner or the best services. I think we're much more thoughtful of it. So then we started doing our own RFPs for everything. Now I think we found a nice balance where we're like thoughtful about the right time to leverage them, whether it's a software reseller, which gets to some of the SaaS stuff that I see in the chat as well, or even like staff augmentation specifically for IT, things like that. We do work with the MAPC a little bit, our like regional planning council. But I think it's also an area for us to explore more. We're probably reinventing the wheel because we're Boston and we're a special snowflake.
You are a special snowflake, Boston. I fully agree. I grew up in Amherst, Massachusetts, and we loved Boston. There was a question from Lindsay around suggestions for any resources about leveraging procurement to support climate initiatives and goals for things like the Green New Deal.
Lindsay, I would love to think through that together. It is very much an area of growth and exploration for us. You know, I feel like we're kind of stuck in this cycle where like folks from the Green New Deal team come to us and they're like, how can we get a contract or do a pilot with like better concrete providers? And it's just like, oh, like we are not a venture capital fund. So just, you know, thinking about all the levers that we can and cannot pull, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. Boston has done something really interesting with the creation of a coastal resilience delivery team to try to fill that gap between like plans and actual construction. And so that work I think is really exciting. And they've just built up a lot of procurement expertise specifically focused on coastal resilience. But otherwise, let's talk and learn together.
And the next question from Brendan, I love, as more software becomes subscription-based and less capitalizable, are there clever ways to deal with moving costs from capital expense to operating expense?
Brendan, big fan, going back to our What Work City days. So good to connect with you. I think this is also a shared challenge. I believe the City of Boston's guidance is that you can pretty much use capital if you're doing like an initial implementation, configuration, but then ongoing costs do need to move to operating. We've also run up against some problems that we can only really do contracts for 3 years. There used to be an exemption for software maintenance so that for like software that you already had implemented, you could just keep maintaining it, but that exemption does not apply to SaaS or to licensing and subscriptions. And so we've been thinking about like, do we do streamlined procurements where we justify having proprietary specifications? But no, yeah, it comes over to operating. I don't know if there's more to be said there.
Yeah, I think the one note that I'll just add there is that because it comes over to operating in year 2, one of the things that we're doing as we are kicking off some of these like large transformation investments, such as like the 301 and basic city services or our permitting and licensing overhaul, is from the get-go, we're outlining like the budgetary, 1 to 10 year plan and working with our budget office on identifying proactively what that looks like in terms of capital and operating, so that it doesn't come as a surprise at the end of the first year, but it's actually something that we're planning up, like upfront to some extent.
And I think those realistic timelines and the collaboration with budget is really important. In the past, I've seen do it identify like, oh, well, there's cost savings from the old system that we're going to sunset. But that doesn't happen right away. Like you have to pay for both systems for a while. So I think being realistic about that builds more like trust. But I would say I just said that I don't need to rewrite the laws, but this is actually an area where I think it'd be interesting to think about like actual policy changes.
And just to piggyback on that, we we did propose a change to the Massachusetts state legislature to amend the like renewal of software that is like in maintenance mode to also include SaaS. We don't know if it's going to pass, but we are trying.
All right, next question from Michael. Have you been able to successfully incorporate accessibility requirements into software procurement in Boston? And if so, what kind of processes have been developed?
I'll give a quick answer and then pass it for more in-depth.
Okay.
You know, I think it's really powerful to kind of put some of those standards in your templates, like for RFPs. But I'm also so excited to have the business relationship managers on Julia's team, because we've realized that like, even if you put it in there, will the evaluators have the ability to evaluate whether someone's, you know, to understand those requirements and to evaluate whether the proposed solution actually meets them. And I think, again, there's such a bad instinct that like, oh, this isn't relevant if it's an internal tool for staff. And so just continuing to try to surface that to people as much as possible. But I'll pass it over.
No, I think, Laura, you said it exactly right. Like, I think step one has been including some of those like standards and policies into our contracting procurement vehicle since the beginning. But the part where we are, you know, and if anybody here has like set up an awesome system, I'd love to hear it. But that is one of the areas for growth for us of like, how do we successfully ensure that at both the evaluation space of the contracts, like in the different people that submit bids, and then at the implementation space and moving on, like in operations, there continues to be adherence to our policies and standards around accessibility, around, you know, security, around, you know, data management, and so on and so forth.
I think we might have time for one more. I'm going to go to this question from Sarah, which is, how have you approached user research in tech procurement processes?
Laura, do you want to talk
Yeah.
about, the first, okay, go for it.
Well, no, I was just going to say, sometimes we just try to outsource it and we're like, please propose an approach that's focused on user research. That's, you know, that's a start. Were you going to highlight something else specific?
Well, I actually had like a clarification question because I did see that in the chat. Do you mean like user research about tech procurement processes or including user research in our technology procurements?
The second one. So like doing user research about what it is you're procuring before you procure it.
Yes. So I think, you know, a lot of times departments are like, I need technology. And it's like, no, you need a process map and then you need process improvement. And so again, I think that's where the business relationship managers, it's such a key role that's really been lacking. Because and the UX capacity that Julia's team actually has, because otherwise I've only seen us like build it in as phase one of the scope, but by then you've already hired someone.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And so I think that's the area where like the UX and service design practice, in addition to the business relationship managers, are like a critical component of these technology procurements. For actually most of the major technology procurements that we've done since I've joined the city, we've, you know, established up front a, you know, current state. I mean, that's actually what we're doing with the supplier portal right now, right? Like a current state understanding of what the technology is, and then understanding what the future state needs to look like, and then translating that. So, you know, from a super like tactical example perspective, like our business relationship managers, as they're working with departments, when a department comes and says, I need this technology, one of the areas in which we're supporting them with Reframe is thinking through not just functional requirements, but actually thinking about like user stories that achieve the outcomes that they're trying to do. And that's just like a small example of how we're trying to bake in a more user-centered approach from the get-go in terms of technology procurements.
Amazing. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to get to every question, but I will encourage folks to continue the conversation on the DSN Slack for any outstanding questions that you may have. But for now, this concludes our session for today. So I really appreciate everyone in the audience for joining us, Laura and Julia. A reminder that today's conversation will be summarized with key takeaways on digitalservicenetwork.org. And take a minute to share the information about DSN with your personal networks and colleagues if you think there's someone who might benefit from these kinds of conversations. This is all about community and network, so please help us continue to build it. And finally, we'd appreciate your feedback on how the event went today. So there should be a quick survey being dropped in the chat. And if you take a few minutes to respond to that, that is greatly appreciated. And once again, thank you to everyone for joining and to Laura and Julia for talking through your like mind-blowing, brilliant approaches in the city of Boston. It is so fun to learn about the different strategies you deploy and to hear about the relationships that you've built with each other. So thank you again.
Thank you all so much for having us. And, you know, if there's folks on the call that are interested in continuing some of these conversations, I think we can share, well, Michaela, you shared our LinkedIn, right? But we can also share our email addresses.
Yeah, I can include that in our follow-up if you're comfy with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank y'all so much.
Thanks, everybody.